Hey guys, how's everybody doing? My name is John Matchette. I run what's called applied intelligence for Accenture in North America. So that's AI, automation, a lot of the Mars type technologies. So this is, I guess, what the business leadership track. So I'm going to have a discussion about how we talk to some of our executive leaderships, particularly about all the disruption. So if you're an EVP at let's say a $5 to $50 billion company, like what are you going to do when you see all this disruption around? How do you behave? So that's what this talk's about. So to start, what I like to think about sometimes is when we were kids. I'll date myself just a little bit, like all the stuff you used to have, right? So if you wanted to know the temperature, there was a thing on the wall, right, with mercury. If you wanted to play music, you needed a stereo, right? If you wanted to see what was on at the movies, you had a couple choices, maybe the newspaper. We call that automated landline. If you wanted to have something translated a little harder, you had to make a friend that actually spoke the target language, right? So but today, all this stuff is going away, right? Hopefully, except for your multilingual friends, and they're being replaced by, like this, right? All of it. And the thing that is sort of taking away our stuff is also changing the way that we're competing in business. It's the same disruptive forces. And what we see today is the effective business competitors are competing with information versus the stuff. And the purpose of what I'm going to talk about today is to take kind of the fear away from that, because of all the opportunity you see with that, there's also concern, what if someone comes after my market? So that's what this is about. What's driving all of this disruption, of course, is data and the way we use it. So ML, AI, all of these things running in the cloud. So that's what's doing it. And I think really what we're about today in this market is we have the ability to compete on our imagination, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's not a claim you could make, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's a whole new space. So you're in the right place. This is the right conference. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to tell you a story about our company, okay? So Accenture, a lot of the work we do, but not all of the work we do, is about helping our clients with some aspect of technology. And about 10 years ago, we were a $22 billion company doing mostly ERP work. But times changed, technology changed, we wanted to change, right? So what we did is we created this metric we called the digital rotation, and that is a measure of how much of our revenue comes from the new digital things, ML, AI, the Mars stuff, cybersecurity, cloud. 10 years later, we're 60% rotated to the new, and we're now a $40 billion company. So I say this as encouragement. If you're a business leader and you're trying to get your company to shift, if we can do it with almost 500,000 people, trust me, you can do it too, right? So to get started then, what we'll do is come to idea one. We've touched on it just a little bit, kind of big ideas. Two big ideas. This is one. What we see today and going forward is the successful competitors will compete with information and less from physical things. Now, that's sort of an easy thing to say, right? But the hard part is if you're a company with, 50,000 employees, 100,000 employees, it's hard to get that into your culture. So how do you do it? How do you do it safely? But this is the case. And just to make the case, I'm going to show you some, we'll start with some macroeconomic data. If you don't sort of believe what I just said, you can check this out. So what this does is it compares the highest rated companies from 10 years ago to today. And what you can see is about 10 years ago, the highest rated companies, generally speaking, were making things, the stuff, right? Physical, products, industrial equipment, fuel, resources, this sort of thing. Today, generally, they make ones and zeros, all right? The evidence is clear. Now, the thing is, do you think this is a story about the tech companies? It's not. It's about the customers of those tech companies. That's what it's about. It's about people, entities that want to use things like Amazon SageMaker to do ML or EMR to do large data processing, that sort of thing. That's what the story is about. And so I'll tell a story a little bit about one of our clients that's in the beer brewing industry. Now, think about brewing. Do you think brewing is a digital industry? Doesn't seem like it, right? But if you think about it, right, everyone knows how to make beer. The ancient Egyptians could make beer. So what do you do when everyone can make your product? One of the things you need to do is get really good information. So how you price, so you do micro-segmentation with your advertising spend, how you touch your customers more effectively, how you segment them. All of those things are about being really good with data science and data in the cloud. That's how you get better. So that's true. So brewing, they do want to be like digital competitors. It's counterintuitive, but that's the way it's going. But the thing is, I think most industries are sort of ready for that kind of disruption. I want everyone to leave this room feeling like, wow, like I could go be a digital competitor too. And I would do kind of a fun little exercise here to just to show you. Like I'll bet I can convince you like we could all be digital competitors. So to do that, we're going to do a little study. Okay, first start with a show of hands. Who's taken an Uber or Lyft in the last month? Yeah, like everybody, right? So you guys know this story, right? That I'm about to tell. But let's nonetheless just real quick look at the transportation experience, from '98 to today, right? So I'm going to go pretty quick, just try to keep up here. So in '98, you go outside in the cold. Today, stay in a warm place with your phone. '98, you hail a cab. Today, you press a button. '98, you have no idea how long it'll take. Today, you get a pretty good idea. '98, you know nothing about the car or the driver. Today, you get a pretty good idea. You enter a mostly dirty taxi. They were disgusting, right? Today, you go into a mostly clean car, particularly if it's a black, right? Then you got to talk to the driver, which route, you want to go this way, this highway, blah, 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 right? Now it's just like all GPS, it's super simple. Then paying was a mess. You have change. Does the card reader work? Are they lying whether it does work or not read? Et cetera. They want a big tip. Now it's all automated, just take out your card. Finally, the receipt, you land, they may not have one. Maybe they throw a bunch of blanks at you, you can't keep track of it. Today, you just walk out and you get an email, right? Now, you guys know that story, right? When you raise your hands, you're like, thank God, like that. So just because we got this industry handled, I think every industry is done? Is there more opportunity? Right, obviously there is, right? So now imagine another situation. You're at a Little League game, the kid gets hurt, it's not life-threatening, but you gotta go to the ER. Let's look at that experience over a 10-year period, okay? So, I think it's gonna advance. Here we go. Oh, okay, yeah. All right, so if you're in the hospital, so how does that look? '98, you walk in, today you walk in. '98, you check in, today you check in. '98, you sit down, you have no idea how long it'll take. Today you check in, you have no idea how long it'll take. '98, you read an article about cell phones. Today you read an article on your cell phone, right? You call up, you give all the PII, it's all manual. Today you PII, it's all manual. '98, you go back down, you listen to the Spice Girls on your portable CD player. Today you go back and listen to Taylor Swift on your Bluetooth. You try not to get sick from people next to you in both situations. And finally, at some point, you get called in. Now, nothing has changed, right? Do you think this is the only transformed industry? No. Do you think we could do something about this if you so choose? Right. Would it be easy? Probably not, but it's doable, right? So I think, when you leave this room, you look around all these experiences, you go like Uber and Lyft were just a start. There's fair game everywhere, right? So Accenture, we wanted to understand this whole thing of disruption, so we started thinking about it. And the first thing was we wanted to find what a disruptor is. How do you even think about them? A disruptor in a marketplace is simply a person or entity that unlocks trapped value, value that was ready to be released. Technology, society, regulations, that kind of stuff, right? So that's what they do. We want to understand it better. So we did 2 studies. The first one was massive. We looked at 3,600 companies. We looked at their data. We talked to their executives. And we asked the question simply what's happening with disruption in your industry? And it was pretty interesting. Of this thousands of companies, a full 68% felt like there was disruption coming to them within 3 years. Almost everybody. Only 15% felt like they were prepared. Almost nobody. But what we also learned is that with disruption, there's a fairly traditional pattern that it follows. And if you learn the pattern, you can begin to use disruption as a competitive tool. So you got to know the pattern, kind of where you fit. So here's the pattern. There's a whole book about this. So this is a 300-page book, and this is the 17-page slide version. But this is the pattern. Okay, so you're somewhere in this grid. Okay. It's a company. And on the vertical axis, what you have is how much disruption is occurring in your industry. And the horizontal is how much is coming. Okay, so current disruption versus future disruption. And you're somewhere in here. So if you're in the lower left, this sort of durable, there's some structural protection you have in your industry which is preventing disruption. Sort of like, the FDA won't let foreign drugs into the US. That's a regulatory sort of disruptive force, right? If you're right above it in viability, you've already had some change. You're probably in a new or emerging business. This is where a lot of software and high-tech companies are. If you're over to the right and volatile, it's bad because like you've had change, but more is coming. So you're in an industry probably where your strength has become a weakness. And right below it is vulnerable, like not a lot of change, but it's coming. So there's going to be some erosion of your protection. So what you got to do is kind of figure out where you are. And I'll make it easy for you. Also in the study, we just mapped it out. And I know you can't really read it. You can download the documents. But the thing about this, when you look at this data, is that what it really shows is like there's no safe quadrant, right? There's all kind of clumped together. There's no safe quadrant. If you look at like auto, it's right there in durable between viable and it's in durable but close to viable. So do you think because auto sits in durable, they feel safe, like they feel like they're good? No, right? Their issue, like 5 years ago, the PDE ratio and for automakers and their suppliers was the same. It's about 10%. Today, the suppliers have risen to 12.7. The autos have gone generally down to like 7. And only 3 megatrends have driven that, like electrification, self-driving vehicles, and ride sharing. Those 3 alone caused that shift. Like no one, they're considered less valuable because of 3 disruptive forces, right? So now Audi, if you watch the Super Bowl, they're putting $25 billion into electric cars, but out here in Las Vegas, like Lyft is doing autonomous vehicles. Has anyone taken one of those? Like, yeah, that's kind of cool, right? So that's what's happening. Chemicals too, they're endurable, like they make stuff. It'd be kind of hard to attack that industry. But their issue is like a lot of the physical innovation has slowed down. Like they invented all these new molecules and compounds during the turn of the century. Through like the 60s, they had Kevlar and nylon, but the rate of change has slowed. And so now they're looking to use Mars type technology. A lot of it's like IoT and like AI on sensors watching their factories to get better, right? So they have to get better too, but it's sort of different. So if this is like where you stand, the question is like, what are you going to do? Like if you're an EVP of a business unit and you're looking at all this disruption, like what do you do? What's your strategy? So here's the way we have people think about it. You got to do 2 things, like super simple, and then we'll get more complex. The first is you got to do things differently. You got to go to your legacy businesses and find Mars-type technologies to operate more effectively. You've got to do that. And, it's an and, you've got to do different things. You've got to find new adjacencies that you can use with your core competencies, and then use advanced technologies, AI, data, all the accelerators we have to go attack those industries faster than you could before. So we want to understand like this, like who are good at disruptors. We actually did a second survey. This one was to figure out like who's really good at disruption, and we looked at 1,500 companies this time. It turns out only 6% of companies are actually good at sort of being disruptors. And the way we measured that, by the way, is we looked at companies that were already established businesses, and then we asked which ones were generating 50% or more of the revenue from businesses they had created in 3 years. Right? So who could take an idea, germinate it, scale it, and make money? Only 6% of companies could do that, very effectively. But the 6%, we called them the so-called rotation masters in our study because they could rotate their businesses to the new. And what was true about them was not so much that they generated better ideas or different ideas. Like all of you, if I gave all of you a piece of paper and a pen and said, write down like 3 crazy ideas for your businesses, you could probably do it. Boom, boom, boom. The question is, can you do it? And that's what the 6% were effective at. So we began to think about that, like how do you pull that off? And so we came up with this concept of what we call the wise pivot. How do you pivot from the old to new? And this is actually what the book is about. There's a link to it. It's actually available on Amazon. You can go buy it, right? So that's cool. But here's the 3 steps, like super high level. First off, you got to do some things differently. And so the first thing you've got to do is you've got to transform your core business. So I talked about chemicals. They're using AI for like predictive maintenance. I'll tell a supply chain story in just a bit. But you've got to find ways to generate cash in your business. The reason you're doing it, and this is super important, the reason you're generating that cash is to invest in new things. Okay? You're not generating the cash to give it back to the shareholders or bonuses or stock buybacks. You've got to reinvest it. If you don't, you're going to go, a direction you want to go. The next thing you got to do, and this is what I think some organizations miss, is you then got to grow the core. You got to find more customers who are more profitable, find new ways of interacting with them. So things like digital marketing, customer analytics, find like new web interactions. You've got to find a way to use the hottest technologies to go like delight people in a new way and have a new personalized relationship. Again, the purpose of this is to grow a business, to generate cash, which you can then reinvest. And the next thing is you've got to create these opportunities to do different things, which we call scaling the new. So create the new business. So in our case, it was launching whole new businesses around digital and advertising. Like that's how we got to be our transformation. But in the scaling the new, what you're going to find, I think, if you're like everybody else, is you'll need a new ecosystem of collaborators to do this. You probably can't do it quickly by yourself, and that for a lot of companies is new. We have one client, they make medical devices. They took all of their skills, know-how, and they launched a new adjacent business to actually provide medical services, like with IoT and streaming devices, and it's pretty cool. So now they're making things, and they're providing net new services with all of their medical knowledge. That's what we're sort of getting into. There's a famous story about how John Deere put sensors on, this is not our client, but there's an HBR article, they put sensors and now they sell as a service all the maintenance and tractors by the hour. I mean, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. But how do you manage all this? This is where the wise pivot comes in. This is actually a process, okay? So this is the process. If you're the CFO for a large corporation, our CFO was in Atlanta, David Rowland is his name. He was managing this process for us. This is a process to have synergy, line of sight between your legacy business and your new, and you've got to regulate the rate at which you generate cash. You take cash out of your legacy business and put it into the new business. It is essentially a new responsibility of the CFO primarily, but also the CEO of organizations that want to make this transformation. And the risks are high, right? You move too slow and you're obsolete. You move too fast, you starve your cash source, you starve your legacy business, and you have another kind of problem. So it's a new discipline that I think is going to be extremely important for any business that wants to compete in the market. So I'll give a couple examples. These are both examples of doing things differently. I have some, doing different things, examples like the medical device thing, but these are kind of good. So I told you to tell you the beer story. So if you're a beer maker, like what do? You sell beer, right? And they have all these pressures from craft beer. Listen, these guys, even the big ones, they can make craft beer or buy them. So they got more stroke there than people think. But still, they want to grow. So what we found is using AI and ML and new data sets, we could voluntarily double the consumption of beer with their consumers, and it wasn't tricky. It was, it was interesting. So the way you do it in 3 ways. The first is you get about 10 data sets together, you munge them, and you mine them. And the purpose of this is to figure out who's drinking beer, where are they doing it, what beer and where, right? So it's data like Dun & Bradstreet. There's one called Euromonitor, which has a lot of beer data, Experian, Google, all this stuff, all the network data. And that will tell you who, where, and what. What are they drinking? Step 2 is you've got to go figure out what those people care about. What makes them excited, interested, happy, sad. You've got to know that. So what you do now is use natural language processing, and you go back at those people, and you figure out what they're divulging about themselves voluntarily. So you look at Yelp, you look at Facebook, Snapchat. There's people commenting on all recipes. It's amazing what's out there, right? So now what you got that data, you know actually what motivates them as humans, and you can cluster them. You can use standard clustering analysis, more AI. And you got your striving singles, maybe your middle-aged people that like sports, whatever they are, right? And then for each one of these people, you create specialized offerings that are interesting to them because you know about them now. Like maybe fun run followed by happy hour. Maybe for one group, you teach them how to barbecue and we'll do a beer tasting with barbecue, right? That kind of thing. And then step 3, you should go back out through the web and you touch them in the way that they like to be interacted with. People do interact on all recipes. They do talk on the crockpot sort of chat form, but they also chat on more modern things. So that's how you do it, and that is all about data and AI. And you can stand up such a capability in many industries, right? The way I described it, take away the word beer and put away in any industry you care about, and you're probably in business, right? Here's another one. I like this example. This is an ML story in the operations space. Okay, so this is another client of ours. It's a European home retailer, large retailer. They have all the problems that large retailers have. They have hundreds of thousands of items. They have 400 stores. They have long international procurement lead times from China and other places. They have the inability to put their promotion data into their forecasts. And it leads to all, if you've grown up in like retail or CPG, it is all the problems that you know about. Like on one hand, they would have stockouts, which would cause issues with the revenue and customer service. Or the reverse, they wouldn't sell the stuff, and now they have a capital asset problem due to low turns, right? And their balance sheet is like negatively affected, right? So the thing about, I grew up doing a lot of supply chain work, supply chain analytics, and the thing about this is historically it just relied on 2 data sets to do forecasting. 2. One is what they call time series, so it's looking backwards about what was actually sold, and you try to like figure out a pattern and like project it, right? And you can get tricky or hard, but that's kind of what it was all about. And the other was human judgment, like an expert says, I don't think that's going to be the case. I'm going to change the forecast. 2, there are clients of ours that spend billions of dollars on inventory decisions on 2 variables, right? Think about that. It's kind of crazy. But 2 is probably all humans can handle. It's not all that bots can handle. Okay, so what we did with machine learning is we opened the aperture and we put in about 50 pieces of data. And we didn't know which ones were actually correlated to better accuracy. But we came up with about 10 different ML techniques which would figure that out. So we got, the hard part was to actually get the data, okay? But the data we used it was a lot. It was, advertising spend, type, demographics around the store, type of store, parking lot, how big the parking lot was, whether there was bundled items, where they were in the store, did we have coupons, all that stuff. And we put it into like the big data lake, and we let the machine learning bots like say, okay, here's what we think is going to happen. We were able to improve long-range forecasting by 20%, so it went up to 60. So there's still some lead time there to get better, but that was a massive improvement. And you can see the rest of the numbers they got. It was using ML to simultaneously improve service and the cost to serve, right? And so you couldn't have done this you couldn't have done this 10 years ago. Just it wasn't like even imaginable. So those are the stories. So I'm gonna close it out here. So what we talked about today, and you can download this and read the material, but the point really that we're trying to get across is like you can use disruption to compete if you decide to, right? And to do so, you need your own version of like the wise pivot to think about it and actually regulate it and manage it. But I'll close with here are some of the strategies that we see that are important. These aren't technology strategies. These are like cultural strategies for an organization, okay? So the first is we talked about hyper-relevancy to your customers. We talked about that in the beer example. With today's technologies, you must be hyper-relevant. You must know what they care about, how they feel, how you've made them feel, and whether it's like your chat bots on your customer service, or whether it's how you do promotions or whatever it is. Like you have the ability to do it, so do it. The next is you probably do need a new network, right? There's so much change and innovation in the industry, like no one can keep up anymore. And so you're going to compete with your partners increasingly, right? JVs, academia, maybe open source, whatever it is. Like you're going to compete with your partners more than you have in the past. The next one I think is sort of obvious, but still, you got to be a technology competitor. Like I don't care, you could be in the hardware business, like making things. You still have got to be a technology company and actually nurture that. The next one on talent I think is really interesting. Like everyone would always say, well, people are, obviously, like we're all valuable. Like people have always been valuable, but the difference today is that the pace of change it changes every 6 to 8 months, right? And so in the past, if you had people that knew, like SAP SD, their sales and distribution module, that skill set was good for 10 years. You train them up, you send them to a conference, you're good to go. That's not the case today. Like the Hadoop open source community is like, if you're not like watching it, you can't keep up. So how we treat talent, how we train them, how we hire, how we care for people. I think it's more important now than it was, before, but it's always been important. The next is, again, a little easy to think about, but hard to do. You've got to you've got to treat data science as one of your core competencies. One of our clients is, they make liquefied natural gas. They're super smart people, right? They do liquefied, they're geologists, they're chemists, they're chemical engineers, like the sharpest, cookies around. But that didn't mean they necessarily had a lot of data scientists. So when they went off to do their big IoT, AI, censored predictive maintenance, they didn't actually have the folks, right? So they had to go out, get a network, but they realized that's where they wanted to go. So over the last 3 years, they've been developing a pool of data scientists. Initially, they borrowed, but now, they're growing. So they have a strategy to get there. But just because you're a sophisticated engineering company doesn't mean that you can get to be a data science, competitor overnight. It is a journey. The next is this concept of inclusion. What we mean by this is you've got to have a system to sense and respond to where the good ideas are coming from. And what I think is really attractive about the market today and the technologies is you can fail really quickly, right? And so you may as well try a bunch of things. Try 10 ideas, fail 7, get 3. This is, I think, the Amazon culture, right? So I think they nailed that one. This was not easy to do 10 years ago, right? Because you needed to buy hardware and then staff the team and get a building and buy machines and before you know it, it's $30 million. And you can't fail. You've got to get that one thing right because you're betting a lot on it. But it's not the case anymore. And the last thing is this concept of asset smart. If you're in an industry that does compete, that's asset intensive, you have high invested capital with your machines, you've got to figure out a way to make those machines as smart as humanly possible, right? The machines are the new humans. So that's the last thing we see. So if you want more information on how we're thinking about this and the data, you can go to Accenture.com. There's a wise pivot. There's a book on this topic written by one of the authors was Omar Abash, who is one of our partners in London. And it's a good read. So that's it. We thank you for your time.